Stuart Morris, thanks for joining me on the Everyday Millionaire podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's good to meet you. And, it's 9 p.m. your time. You are in the UK, amazing London, I think you said, or somewhere in the hood where
I'm in the north of England, up in a
Okay.
place called the Yorkshire Dales, which is a very, very beautiful part of the UK.
Yes, it is. Okay, great. So glad you cleared that up. So, Stuart, I look at your bio and there's a couple of really cool little segments in there I'll circle back to, but bios never ever do justice to what my guests actually do, and sometimes they're not even really that current. Not saying yours is not, but when people approach you today, Stuart, and say, "What do you do?" How do you describe it?
The simple answer is I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, all of the neurospicy, and working for somebody else drives me nuts. So very early on in my career, I realized I needed to be running my own business. So I'm currently running 3 businesses. One is where I am. I'm in an 18th century farmhouse, which has been converted into a retreat center and a training center. So for the last 8-9 days, we've been running a training course and then a retreat for a particular organization, which has been phenomenal fun, but the whole team are absolutely exhausted now. I have 3.25 acres of woodland in the middle of this beautiful piece of the UK, and we can bring people up here and put them in the middle of nowhere and let them reconnect with themselves and with nature and think about what they want to do. I also teach people how to be officiants, celebrants, how to take weddings and funerals. Who knew that was a niche? But I run the world's largest trainer of officiants, which again, I thought, let's try this. And suddenly we became really good at it. That's not at all how that story played out, but I like to downplay it. But also because of my background as an entrepreneur, and also I taught entrepreneurship at the Henley Business School, one of the top business schools in the world, for a number of years. I also teach people how to build their own businesses, how to create proper businesses with longevity, the ability to scale, not just the sort of get rich quick scheme things that you do. And that's just huge fun.
Well, that's interesting because on TikTok you can make millions in hours. Anyways, I joke, I jest. Let's
People
talk
think
a
they
little bit
can.
about. I know. We'll pitch that deal. So, in all of this, Stuart, there's a question that I would have for you, and it was a recent debate, and I'm going to unpack a bunch of what you shared with us just there because it's very interesting. But I want to ask you this question. From your perspective, do you think, or how do you view people in general in regards to being an entrepreneur? So, in other words, do you think everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur, or is it just the kind of elite few or the very few? How would you categorize it, and how would you answer that question, thought process?
So it's a perennial question. Are you born an entrepreneur, or can you be trained to be an entrepreneur? And I truly believe the answer is both. Any measure of human behavior there's a bell curve, the normal curve, and most people are somewhere in the middle, and there's a few people at one end and there's a few people at the other end. And so you might find that you have somebody who is incredibly risk averse and they want a nice stable job in a large corporate, and actually that's everything they need from their working life, and then they go home and they have their home life and they are happy. And at the other end of that scale, you have people like myself who have a very different approach to risk. Yes, I do get involved in some relatively high risk sports, and so we have a different view of the world, and we're probably more suited to some of the approaches to entrepreneurship. For most people in the middle, it's entirely possible to de-risk starting your own business, or at least to understand the risks and mitigate some of them. But what we do find when we look at the way that entrepreneurs think about the world versus uh, the general population, there is primarily a different approach to risk and a different approach to the way they see opportunities. So there's definitely a nature part of it, but I do thoroughly believe there is a nurture part of it as well. You can help somebody become better at entrepreneurship, uh, and you can help them to look at risk, because most people think entrepreneurship is about taking risks, and you can help somebody look at it in a different way. And that's something that I help people unpack and understand, and help them to find the place where they feel comfortable.
Yeah, I bring it up because, for me, I've been an entrepreneur for just over 40 years. So it's kind of all I know. And I think everybody thinks like me or everybody thinks like but having interviewed, many, many guests now over the past 8 years on the show, and being a guest on other shows, and just in the nature of what I do and working with real estate investors and business owners, my point of all of that is I investigate the question with almost every guest. Is it nature or is it nurture? And, the many stories, and there's all sorts of things that show up. And I don't know that there's a real thread or a pattern that I can identify. My You use risk as a thing that gets in people's way, and I do agree with that. I think there's always the fear of failure that kind of runs under the surface of how people might define failure. But in my own kind of work in coaching and understanding entrepreneurs, there's no doubt that I'm on an ongoing journey of being the best entrepreneur I can be. But let's go back to, do you think, and this is a discussion because I want to pick your brain given your level of expertise and your own experience with entrepreneurs in this conversation, and that is, I often think that in order to be an entrepreneur, aside from the risk, there's got to be, you have to have tenacity. You have to have I don't even want to call it a work ethic, but you have to want to put your shoulder into it and see what you're doing not as work, but as part of the journey to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So, what is the tenacity that you have? What is your ability to deal with hard stuff, and to be
To push
strategic
through.
and push through? I mean, what is your adversity quotient? As a good friend of mine, Dr. Paul Stoltz, wrote the book, The Adversity Quotient, and many others, but he talked about that. How are you when it comes to adversity? Do you fold up like a cheap tent, or do you actually stand up and stand out and really step into and get on rope and climb that mountain and kind of do all those things? So I don't know where I was
And I
going with
think
that, other than to say, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me. We also need to distinguish between the headline entrepreneurs, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, who are incredible outliers. They are not the normal entrepreneur. They are. We can name a dozen people around the planet who have, through luck or judgment, or actually more often luck, been in the right place at the right time with the right product, the right backing. I don't want to diss their achievements, but actually a lot of them, and Mark Zuckerberg is my favorite example here. He's not a natural entrepreneur. He was just in the right place at the right time with the right product and good advice around him. But people hold him up as an example of an entrepreneur who's been incredibly successful. Many, many people have tried to create the next Facebook, and we only have half a dozen examples of really global new tech businesses. Most entrepreneurs are not in that 0.0001% that have made billions and billions and billions. You can look at an entrepreneur as somebody who started a local grocery store and built it up and they've been there for 20 years. Actually, that's a successful entrepreneur. They're probably no longer very entrepreneurial, just simply because of the time they've taken. But I think you're coming back to the adversity quotient. When I was 16, I broke my neck. I spent 9 months with a collar with bolts holding my head on, and then another 9 months learning to walk without the collar on. So
No
yeah,
fun. No,
yeah,
not a good one.
it's not a great one.
Yeah.
I've survived 2 aircraft crashes since then, neither of which were as bad as that accident. So I should explain that those were flying highly experimental self-built aircraft. So not exactly your run of the mill. Don't be afraid of flying just because I've had a couple of accidents. But you're absolutely right. An entrepreneur has to be somebody who will push through and not give up at the first sign of adversity, or the second, or the third. You really have to have an incredible level of tenacity. I have a business which I've been running for 6 years now, and I haven't taken much by way of salary out of it. But I always knew it would be a long, slow burn, and we're beginning to see that turn around. And we've built that business from absolutely nothing up to being huge. And I think that taking the longer view, being willing to take knockbacks, it's again and the tenacity versus pragmatism. uh, Winston Churchill had a fabulous quote which is often misquoted. He said never give in. A lot of people say never give up. No, absolutely, there is a time to give up. There is a time to look yourself in the eye and say, this is not working, time to stop. But
Mhm.
your spirit, your desire to succeed, whatever that is, whether it's making millions or just making a few tens of thousands, I don't care what your definition of success is. But if your spirit is always there, then you never gave in. But you may have to
Mhm.
give up on this particular business idea. And I've lost count of how many startups I've been involved with, but it must be getting close to 30 now. And I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people around the world start businesses, and not all of them have been successful. But I'm still having a whale of a time. I still fly my own airplane. I still live what I regard as a comfortable life in terms of income. The mortgage is paid every month. Um, I get to walk my dog in the beautiful woods around here most days. Um, so, as far as I'm concerned, my life is how I want it to be most of the time. You ask me, do I have a work-life balance? No, I work insanely long hours, but equally, I can take a couple of days off and the business runs itself. I could take a week off and the business will still be there when I get back, because I've built something that's big enough to cope with me not being there. And I think that, what is the definition of success? That's my definition of success: to have that flexibility, that freedom to say, let's take a couple of days off and go and do whatever it is we want to do, fly the airplane somewhere, walk the dog on the beach, and then fly home. That's freedom. That's a great deal of
There's
happiness. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. There's two things in that. First off, I would never ask you to do you have life balance, because I don't believe in it. I don't think there is such a thing. I think there's just life,
Yeah.
and does it represent, and are you happy? And this all came up for me many years ago when I was coming off a stage after doing a presentation speaking, and some young man came up to me and they went, "Holy cow, Patrick, that was great, and like, how many hours a week do you work?" And I went, what? I don't know. I don't even look at it that way. Like, I don't count hours. I'm doing what I love to do. So none of it really seems like work. It's
Yeah.
commitments, and there's things that I have to do. So in terms of life work balance, it's just my life. So I always look at it that way. I don't think there is such a thing as any balance. You lose your mind trying to balance it. Is the question is have you lived your life in a way that fulfills you? And if your work is, in fact, there is that cliche, when your vocation's your vacation, you'll never work another day in your life. And more often than not, I feel like I'm living on purpose. I'm living my purpose. Both my wife and I feel that way. So it doesn't really feel like work. We don't know what else we'd want to do. We don't pine for anything. We don't sit there and go, if only, we just don't live in that way. So that's one
Yep.
part of it. And then there's another interesting thing that you mentioned that I wanted to, it was such a profound, or at least I say profound, it was for me. When I often have asked over the years about a guest's definition of success. And what I've quit asking it only because, number one, it catches people off guard, or they don't have a definition, or it just isn't there, right? So my point is, but I did ask that question once of a guest, and he said, my definition of success is, am I living the vision for my life on any given day? And if the answer is yes, then I'm feeling successful. And it really is, that simple and that
Yeah.
profound, and I know that for you in the work that you do, or I don't know, but I'm assuming that in the work you're doing, is because we cross over in some areas for sure in the work that we do, but I think that there's probably a pretty good chance in you working with entrepreneurs, you're saying, okay, what's your vision? They're going, I don't have a vision. And you're going, well, let's start there. Let's create that vision and see what we're working backwards from. Now, I don't know if that's the case for you, but I'm sure there's some version of that, Stuart, but please feel
I think
free
it's
to correct.
often you're asking somebody to think about what they want life to look like. And for
Mhm,
me, can I imagine a time when I retire and go and play golf? Well, apart from golf being the worst game in the world as far as I'm concerned,
mhm,
um, no, I will continue to work because I absolutely love what I do. I do
mhm,
want time to be able to go and sit and watch the sunset with my partner, and we will just sit under a tree and watch a beautiful sunset and just have that time together. What about you? You said about you couldn't tell you how many hours. I have no clue how many hours I've worked today. Um,
exactly.
but this afternoon we walked the dog for an hour and a half through the hills and around the lake. Um, some of that time we talked about work, some of that time we talked about family, some of that, is that hour and a half work or was it downtime? It was both. This
Mhm,
evening, I had dinner with my partner and my son and my father. And we sat around the table and we talked about the retreat center where we all live. Well, she doesn't live here, but the other three of us do. Um, and we talked about all sorts of other things. So for me, the ability to not have to distinguish between I've arrived at work at 9 a.m. and I'm going to leave at
mhm,
6 p.m. and I've got to drive through the rush hour traffic. Um, for me, that ability to decide what I do when is the quality of life. And yes, there are times when I will pull 18-hour days because something just has to be finished today.
mhm. Sure.
And there are other days where if I check email once, it was a busy day. It's you. So for many people, they've never thought about that. They've always assumed, school, college, get my degree, join a company, work my way up, middle management by middle age, probably plateau, maintain the pension rights, the healthcare, all of these other things, and all of a sudden, your daytime life is gone. These days, you're on holiday, but you're still checking your phone. You're still checking in with email just in case there's something you need to deal with. You're gone are the days where you could go on a 2-week vacation and be out of
Be
contact.
Yeah, be gone, yeah.
Yeah, that life. Um, I think so many people are living lives of quiet desperation where they're stuck in this treadmill. And so you're absolutely right. The first thing we need to ask somebody is, what is it you want life to be?
Mhm,
And that can be so different for different people. For me, setting people free from that drudgery is immensely satisfying. Equally, taking a funeral and giving somebody an amazing send-off is, for me, incredibly satisfying.
Hmm.
Teaching somebody how to do that is incredibly satisfying. Learning to fly my airplane in new and interesting ways, restoring a 63-year-old classic airplane has been phenomenally interesting. I want all of those things in my life. And that's what entrepreneurship gives me. It gives me the freedom to do all of those things. Whereas having a day job that's that classic, do you work to live or live to work? And as you said,
Hmm.
I just live.
So when we look
There isn't
at,
this distinction.
yeah, go ahead, finish that.
There isn't this distinction between
Yeah,
life work. It's I choose
just life.
to
Yeah.
live a life that is, for me, fantastic.
And it's interesting that, my views over the years have changed. I hit that whatever representation of 65 years old is. So I'm 65 years old and I'm looking at my life and I'm going, gosh, what the hell would I ever do if I wasn't doing what I'm doing? And it just, going out and playing pickleball in some warmer climate doesn't, it just has zero appeal to me. And like you, I golf, but I'm not a golfer, and I've done lots of sports, but this is what I want to do and be and engage in relationships with entrepreneurs, with those individuals that are on a journey of being their greatest selves. That's part of my purpose.
Yeah.
But I want to go back a little bit here, Stuart, is that, when you talk about your retreat center, you're on a beautiful property. And I'm just on my own journey of having doing some workshops on my property. And so I'm not I'm not in the beautiful countryside, although I am on the countryside and it is beautiful and it feels like you're a long ways from everything, but you're really not. Anyways, my point is that when you're working, are you working small groups? Are these groups of 550, 500? What's kind of the
So
model
we
that
have,
you?
yeah, we are in the middle of nowhere. In
Mhm.
on the UK scale, I know that Canada is very much bigger, but we are miles from the nearest village.
Yeah,
And so we have 20 bedrooms here. So that's the kind of
wow,
group size up to 20 people that we work with.
beautiful. Yeah.
Um, and people forget, this is a 300-year-old building. It was a farm in the 18th century that's been extended and modified. So it, it may not always work quite how you want it to. The heating is a little bit temperamental. We don't have a big uh, commercial kitchen. There's no stainless steel or aluminum in the kitchen. It's a farmhouse kitchen. So if all 20 people come down for breakfast at the same time, the coal-fired Arga, which is this nearly 100-year-old cooker that we cook breakfast on, you may have a little difficulty keeping up with the eggs orders. So we try and encourage people to stagger their arrival at breakfast. So,
Yeah.
for example, but there's been a 20-year dream of mine to own something like this, to run a business like this. And I'd never run a hospitality business. So there's a huge amount of um, hubris, you could argue, to say, right, at the end of a global pandemic, at the beginning of a cost of living crisis, I'm going to buy a hospitality business that I've never run before and bet my life savings that I can turn this business around. Um, and the challenge, the just the sheer audacity of, can I do this, is phenomenal. And there are nights where I lie there awake thinking, have I made a horrific mistake? But equally, looking yesterday afternoon as this group of people left, hugging one another, smiling, exchanging numbers, sending each other WhatsApp messages, promising to stay in touch.
Mhm.
They'd been well fed, they'd slept well, they'd had meditations in the gardens, they'd gone for walks. We had changed their lives for the better. And they had eaten well, wholesome food. It's all cooked from scratch. None of it arrives from, sort of ready baked just for deep frying. It's all properly cooked food. my son is my head chef. And and somebody turns up and says, I'm gluten-free and I'm lactose intolerant and I'm vegetarian, and he goes, right, what can we do? He's up for the challenge. He will work out how to feed you well. And so our job is to care for people in this way and send them back out into the world having done whatever they do. We have corporate groups. We have the senior leadership from global car manufacturers or global oil companies or eco charities. Those sort of two ends of the market, who will come here and spend a few days just strategizing because they have privacy. There's no cell phone coverage up here, so we can disconnect them from the world and they can focus on what they do. And so for me, that joy of saying, right, let's take you out of the rat race, let's take you out of the world where you are connected every second to everything, and give you a meal that was cooked slowly and that you sit and eat slowly and that you engage in conversation with the people around you and then enjoy that socialization, enjoy that company, enjoy the laughter. That, for me, is just a phenomenal transformation that we give people here. And we can do that, or if they want, we have 200 megabits a second internet. They have everything they need if they want to stay connected, but they have the choice. And for so many of us, we just don't have that choice. So that's, you can see the stone wall behind me. It's hardcore old school building. And then at the other end of it, I'm sitting there taking somebody and saying, okay, let's build a business that's going to feed you, your family, that's going to have employees, because unless you've got employees, you're self-employed. And if you are self-employed and you take a week off, you stopped earning for that week. If you can build something that is really going to enable you to live the life that you want, where if you take a week off, or next summer, I'm planning to take over a month off from all my businesses. I'm going to take my, what will then be 64-year-old classic airplane. I'm going to fly it across the Atlantic, and I'm going to come and visit friends and family in the US and Canada, and do some touring, visit some really interesting places that I've always wanted to fly through to, and then I'm going to fly it home back across the Atlantic. And that's going to require, I can't be checking email while I'm at 14,000 feet over the North Atlantic flying solo. So my business has to be in a situation where it can cope without me, full stop, for days at a time. And that's what I want to try and encourage people to think about. Not just a get rich quick scheme, not just a scheme where you're hustling, but something where you've actually built something that has longevity and that can exist beyond you, that you've implanted that vision into your staff and your team, and that at some point, because it'll all get to us at some point, you're not going to be here. Will your children have something to benefit from, or will that business just go bust the day you die? And I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about running their own business, they haven't looked forward at that generational value either.
It's interesting. And by the way, if you end up in Vancouver, be sure to look me up. Now, when we look at entrepreneurship, we talk about success. It's interesting that we get into this because in some regards, so, one of the businesses that I own, and I've got 3 different operating companies, 4 technically, I guess. But anyways, one of my primary businesses that I've owned, I've literally owned it for 40 years. I've not even had a key to that business since, 2005 or 6 or something along that line. And it does its thing. And I have a great team of people, and we connect once every couple of weeks and make sure everything is handled. But they just literally had a record revenue year. And that was after going through COVID and having to close a location and doing a whole bunch of things. But the point is around all of it is that entrepreneurs are not for the faint of heart. You have to be able to and want to, think on your feet and make a difference. And I want to take you back to something that you shared in just terms of, the group as they're leaving and, making a difference in people's lives. Not only because this literally just came up this weekend for me. I want to share just a brief story. So my wife, who's in Montreal at a World Figure Skating Championship, she texts me and she goes, "Hey, hun," she goes, "Do you remember Doug? You know, he did our values to vision workshop, I don't know, several years ago." And I go, "Yeah, I kind of do remember Doug." And he goes, "Well," she said, "well, he just came up to me, gave me the biggest hug and said, 'I want to share something with you.' And he goes, 'That weekend that you did that workshop,'" and it was a small workshop, I'm thinking 10 or 15 people, I don't recall it exactly. He goes, "That particular workshop," he goes, "I had been thinking for many weeks leading up to about committing suicide." And he said, "Through that work, I obviously decided not to. And as a matter of fact, it reignited my whole life. And to this day, this many years later, I use a number of the tools." Now, I share that story with you, number one, because of course you would appreciate just how good you can feel knowing, wow, I had that kind of an impact and I didn't even know it. It's like years later we discover it. And the reason I share that for you is that as much as we're getting the results for the clients that we have, and you're having the impact that you're having. I just did a podcast on this. I did a standalone on another podcast I do called Mindset Matters. My point is, I've come to realize that I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm doing it for me. I get up, I grind, I face the headwinds, I face the challenges. And when I hear stories like that, I go, that's awesome. But ultimately, if you're not doing it for you, then you got to quit doing it. And so that's a kind of a high in the sky, throw it, lob a conversation your direction, Stuart.
Well,
But
yeah, I can absolutely relate to that, and I
yeah.
have two stories which speak to that. One, a charity that I support is works with prisoners, people who've committed serious crime, spent significant periods in prison, and deserve to. There's no wishy-washy stuff here, but they then come out and somehow they've got to reintegrate into society, find a job. And one of the things we do is help them to get training to go and get a job. And that it's hard because as soon
Hmm.
as let's look at your resume. Yeah, I spent 10 years inside. Yeah, that's not a good ending. And a lot of
No.
these guys struggle with incredible mental health issues. And I have a dear friend who has struggled with this kind of issue and drugs and alcohol addiction. And he and I were talking recently, and I gave him his first job out of prison, and that was over 20 years ago now. And he has a stable job, a wife, and he's getting on with life. And he whenever we speak, he never fails to say, "You were the first person to believe in me."
Hmm.
And that stopped me from ending up taking my own life.
Hmm.
Now, it hasn't been plain sailing. He's had struggles in between. At the other end of it, I had a woman who was on a course that I was leading who, when faced with the enormity of what she was trying to achieve, what her vision was, what she wanted to do, ended up with a panic attack and sort of sitting on the floor going, "I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it." And here we are 5 years on, I think, from that. And in fact, she and I are exchanging messages today. She's out there, she's doing the things she wants to do, she's running her own business. It's as successful as she needs it to be. It's successful. It's successful by her definition of successful. It's blessing her life. It's feeding her. It's giving her a sense of purpose. It's doing what she needed of it. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The warm and fuzzy feeling I have from both of those stories is like I touched those people's lives in a positive way. And yeah, I can say selfishly that makes me feel better about me.
Hmm.
And it is that yes, I want to do it for other people, but actually I am doing it for me too.
I'm often, when I'm myself in my own life and learn lessons, a lot of lessons the hard way. Is sounds like
It's the
you,
only way
like
to
me.
learn them.
That's the only way. We don't learn from our success. We learn from our mistakes, as they say, and I've
Hmm.
made plenty of them. But there's a conversation that I always like to engage guests in at some point, especially individuals like yourself who are coaching and working with entrepreneurs, and the understanding of living a values driven life. So even understanding what your values really are, being true to those values, understanding the difference between being in integrity with your values and not. And I find, I'm just sharing this only as a question to how does it show up for you, is that I often come across so many individuals who, from a morality point of view, they figure they're dialed in, like, but I'm going, okay, so forget about societal morals. Let's just all agree that at some level we should probably stay in those swim lanes. But what about your own personal values? What are your core values? Are these the kind of conversations that you're having, just out of curiosity, with your client base? Is that something that you speak to at all, Stuart? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely, and more than that, I speak to it with my teams all the time.
Hmm.
And I think any business is carries the DNA of the founder and the leadership, and it's all too easy to see examples. Actually, Boeing right now is a really good example of a company that was founded on a DNA of solid engineering. Quality ran through the veins of that business for decades. And then the leadership became focused on the bottom line. It was all, well, in fact, it wasn't the bottom line. What they became focused on was the share price. And in fact, they moved the senior management of Boeing from Seattle, the home of Boeing. They moved it to Chicago. They outsourced the production, or sort of split off the production of the aircraft to subsidiary companies, which were spread around in different places. And everything was focused on the short-term share value because that's what the leadership were being paid on. If you can get the share price up 10%, you'll earn another however many $1 million. And we've ended up with aeroplanes falling out the sky and bits falling off them. I know that's a potentially contentious thing to say, but I truly believe if you take your eye off the values that you hold dear and start valuing the money more than anything else, you will end up with cheap. You'll end up with shoddy. You'll end up with customers who are unhappy with what you're doing. And actually, one of the statements that I have always said, in one of my businesses, we have a $4,000 or $6,000 product, US dollar, and even the lowest member of the team has full authority to refund the customer if that's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
And
Because that's what you stand for.
yeah, if the right thing to
Hmm.
do, yeah, forget the terms and conditions.
Hmm.
If the right thing to do from a standpoint of generosity and compassion is refund that money to them, even the lowest member of staff in the team has full authority to do that, and the absolute knowledge I will not shout at them. I will
Well, it's
accept
in.
their call on that.
Yeah, there's a theme that I've been really hitting on in 224 that Stephanie and I are living into, my wife and our team, by the way, and we've done some different things around that work, which is, clarity equals velocity. Now, catchy phrase maybe, people go, well, that's a cool thought process. But when you start to unpack what clarity equals velocity means, there's layers upon layers upon layers of where we are not clear as a business, as a team, as a leader, CEO or president, a general
Yeah.
manager, a supervisor. And where that clarity comes from is really the pointy end of the spear, whatever that might be. You talk about Boeing, and you can blame anybody you want to blame, but the CEO, the management team, the board of directors, they all got to go look in a mirror. If they're not getting the results, or if things are coming apart at the seams, that's the only place it is. And interestingly enough, I learned that lesson many years ago from a good friend of mine somebody who became a good friend of mine, was a big supplier. I was a really strong client of his, and it was about a shipping thing, and a late shipment cost me a lot of money, and blah blah blah, whole story. And I phoned him, and he's the CEO slash president of that business. And I said, Mike, I go, dude, like, I don't know, and I think it was your stock guy, your inventory guy. And he goes, Patrick, he goes, when this shit happens, there's only one place I go, and that's to the mirror. And I look in the mirror and I go, no, it wasn't your fault. It was your stock guy's fault. He goes, no, let me explain this to you. There's only one place the buck stops, and that's with me. And yes, he may have missed the boat on that, but I have to go back and go, how did that happen? Because it should not have happened. And maybe it was him, but at some point I look in the mirror and I go, where am I responsible for this? And it was a huge lesson for me. And that was the kind of the benchmark and the bar that he set for that particular business, that he did very, very well under his leadership. By the way, he sold for a multi-million-dollar exit, and then it went south, but that's a different story. My point is that he had those kind of values. And I didn't agree with them all, by the way. I didn't align with all of his stands, but the point is he took those stands. And
Yeah.
that was, I think, the most important part, is that he stood for that. His team stood for that. And the business was a reflection of what he stood for. And he happened to be, a fairly big personality in that regard. And you just didn't, I mean, you could challenge him and he would love to debate, but I never saw anybody that got past that line, if you will, of definition, that defining values that his company operated on, which was just a representation of him. So
Yeah.
when you're working with entrepreneurs, and I'm saying this because I'm curious as to your own experience. And, many of our listeners are entrepreneurs. And do you see that as being a fundamental or a common breakdown in
I think
entrepreneurs and business owners?
if you aren't clear of your own morality, perhaps morality there is the wrong word. If you aren't clear of your own values,
Hmm.
then when decisions come, you will be blown left and right by whatever wind is blowing. It is
Hmm.
necessary for you to understand, I think, what your definition of right and wrong is, so that when the hard decisions come, you know how to make the right decision. And whatever that right decision is, a good example perhaps, uh, 2009, my first marriage was breaking up. My business failed, and we had a very large pile of personal debt. And a lot of people said to me, you know what, just declare personal bankruptcy, just walk away. You are never going to climb out from under that mountain of debt. And I knew that if I did that, my ex-wife and children would lose the house that they lived in, because I was still
Hmm.
part owner of that house, and the bankruptcy process would have taken that house. And that was not an option. So yeah, it would have been easy for me to say, you know what, she's my ex-wife, I can walk away, I don't care anymore. But actually, I shouldered that debt, and it took me 9 years to pay it off, but I did. And my
Hmm.
children always had a roof over their head. And so, that I don't say that as anything heroic. It was just a decision that came out of understanding my own morals and my own
Hmm.
values.
Hmm.
And it was hard. It was very hard, but I did it. If I hadn't understood my values, then and your clarity thing, it's very easy to get up in the morning and work hard towards a goal if you are clear about what that goal is. If you
Hmm.
aren't clear about what that goal is, then there will be no velocity. And also important to remember, a velocity is not just speed, it is a direction.
100%.
It, it,
Yeah.
it is both parts. And you have to know which direction am I going in and how quickly am I going. And even if the speed slows down and the direction may change a little bit, I'm still heading this way.
Yes.
And with that clarity, that understanding of this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is what I'm trying to achieve, then you have something that you can build longevity out of. Otherwise, you're just hustling this hustle, that hustle, the other hustle. I've known people who've tried every side hustle on the planet. Oh, I'll try
Yeah.
a little bit of property investment. Oh, I'll try a little bit of Amazon arbitrage. Oh, I'll try a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And they're working their asses off and not actually making much by way of progress because they're focused on, I'm just going to get some money in, not on what is my direction of travel, what is it I actually want to achieve here. And I think that's my message is let's work out where it is you're trying to go and build towards that, rather than let's just try go this way and that way.
I love it. Yeah. And I think, it all comes back to also what it looks like for your team in terms of clarity. When you talk about culture, when you talk about environment, that all comes from understanding what the values are in your business and the values that you stand for within your business. And culture, really, when you get clear on what the culture is that you're building, then ultimately you attract the right people and you deflect those that don't align with that particular culture. It even makes the hiring process much easier. So it's kind of a cool philosophy and a good direction to go. So let's go on a kind of, I want to understand a little bit more about the work that you do. So you're bringing in individuals and or corporations, entrepreneurs or individuals who want to be entrepreneurs or take their business to the next level. Are these all different programs? So would you have a corporate, okay, bring your whole team in, or would you then say, okay, I've got a dozen or I've got 20, whatever you say, different individuals all here. Maybe they're here with their partner and they're entrepreneurs and I'm going to work them through a process. How do you break your groups down?
So two different ways of looking at it. So for here at High Trenhouse at the retreat center, a corporate can come and book and do their own thing. We can help facilitate it, but more often than not, they bring a facilitator with them and we just look after the hospitality side of it. Or a yoga practitioner may bring their clients and they run their program. So that's one side of the business. We just look after the hospitality side of it. Mm-hmm. For my entrepreneurship business, which I call the 1 in a Million Life, and the book of that name will be out in August, I think, this year.
Congratulations. Nice.
I hope so. It's a lot of fun working towards it. And that's the course that I have. That's aimed at an individual. So you can sign up. Most of the materials are online. You work through it in your own time. And we have a group coaching program. So each month we're connecting you with similar people who are trying to do the same thing in terms of launching their own business, but it might be a very, very different business. And the strength there is in that heterogeneous view of it. You might have somebody who says, I really want to run a property business. Somebody else who says, I've always dreamt of running my own restaurant. Okay, well, two very, very different businesses, but you might have thoughts that inspire each other. You might have encouragement for one another. So I'm very strong believer in the strength of community. And so we put you through the online program. We put you into the group coaching. And obviously, if you want one-to-one coaching, then that's an option as well. And then we have the boot camp where we bring you here. In 5 or 7 days of really intense work, do what that program might have taken 6 months to do, because we're doing it day after day after day, hour after hour after hour. You will be exhausted by the end of it, absolutely mentally fried, but you will have clarity. And so we can do it a number of different ways. So in that business, I'm definitely working with the individuals, and more often than not, it's individuals that are currently in middle management roles in large corporates. As I said earlier, sort of dying that slow, quiet desperation death of I've got to go to work, I've got to go to work, but this isn't feeding my soul. And it's setting people free from that death is where I really find myself energized, and that's why I call it
So
the one
what,
in a million life. It's
yeah,
living the
no
life
kidding.
that most people won't.
So what got you on this journey? So let's go back a whole bunch of years. When we talk about entrepreneur, nature, nurture, were your parents entrepreneurial? Were your siblings entrepreneurial? How did you get on your journey of being an entrepreneur? Or when did you wake up to that? Or has it always been that way?
My dad was a minister. My mum was a school teacher, and I kind of knew that I would always run my own company. I went to university. I got a very deep geek degree. Joined an electronics company for 5 years, which I absolutely loved. Had an amazing time. Learned a huge amount. Moved to a smaller business, that was a software business. Didn't love it so much, didn't get on with the staff, didn't like the culture, left after about 18 months. Moved to a telecoms company, which went bust, and well, was bought out by its largest competitor and shut down. And I sat there thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get this payout. Do I just go and look for another job? And at this point, I'd got two small children and another one on the way. And I thought, nope. So I picked the phone up and I called all of our old customers. And I said, we've just been shut down. Would you like me to run your technical support for you? And that was the
Mm,
start of my first business. It was kind of a moment of, do I just go and get another job? Or do I have the courage of my convictions and start calling customers? And so I started that business looking after my old customers, and it's just evolved out from there. And there have been times when I've gone and worked for other people, usually smaller, more interesting companies, and helped people start businesses. A friend of mine came along one day and said, I've got this business, it's in Moldova. And I was like, well, where on earth is that? And it turns out it's in Eastern Europe, it's next to Ukraine. Um, and yeah, we've just started a software development company over there. Do you want to help us build this business? And when I joined, I was the fourth employee here in the UK. I spent a quarter of my time in Eastern Europe building the team up there, and the rest of my time working remotely, but living back in the UK and supporting them over there. I did that for a few years, and a couple of years ago, they floated on the New York Stock Exchange for $5 billion. I think that was a success. I had a whale of a time, absolutely loved it, learned an amazing amount. I worked for the Henley Business School for 4 years. That drove me nuts. It was a big
mm,
organization, very bureaucratic. Academia is a very slow-moving thing sometimes. But equally, I got to teach young people how to start their own businesses all over the world: Kazakhstan, Eastern Europe, Denmark, Hong Kong, China. Just had an absolute blast traveling the world. Turkey, that was some of the most interesting places to help people start businesses. And also, I find it very, very humbling. So, Turkey is a really good example. Did you know that Turkey has more journalists in prison than any other country?
mm.
Not per
Wow.
capita, just full stop.
Holy
And I
cow.
was asked to go and run an entrepreneurship program for journalists who wanted to be independent, running their own businesses, journalists in Turkey. And yeah, that was deeply humbling, because I'm looking at this group of people, 100% of whom had already spent time in prison for trying to tell the truth. That
Mhm.
teaches how strong are your values when you're faced with somebody like that.
Right.
Yeah, really, really interesting, really humbling, and incredibly exciting. So yeah, that was kind of the very quick summary. And and I've had mental health struggles. You spoke about suicide earlier. I'm here because somebody got in the way one day when I was about to press the button on my life. That person still doesn't know that they stopped what they stopped,
Mm.
but had they been 30 seconds later, it would have been too late. I'm very glad that they did because I've turned my life around, and that's required a significant amount of help from medical professionals. And I'm not afraid to say that because actually, if you break your leg, you need a medical professional to help you put it
Sure.
back together. And
Yeah.
if your brain breaks, go get help. If you're struggling with depression, go get help.
Please.
In,
Yeah.
in whatever form that takes.
Sure.
So yeah, it hasn't all been easy. I've struggled with massive debt. I've struggled with mental health issues. I've struggled with physical health issues. I've had businesses that have been wildly successful, and I've had businesses that have cost me everything, including marriages. But that's the reality of life lived rather than just existed.
I love the way that you kind of position that just now, because it is truly that, somebody listening to this may go, "Oh gosh, that's just stupid. That's crazy. Why would anybody want to do that?" But it's not really, it's just a different way of looking at the world, isn't it? And, one of the things that I know myself, and I'll ask you this question. There's a couple things I want to ask you, so I don't want to step over it. So when you talk about that individual coming into your life at that right moment and all the rest of it, did that, and I've heard these stories from others where, like, I was going to do this and this guy showed up, and it's like, we'll call it a higher power intervention, if you will, or intervening, whatever the word that you want to use there. But for you, did that show up that way? Does that then lend your thought to, something, maybe there is a higher power, not that you didn't believe that before, or was that just evidence of that, or how did that
W-
land for you? I'm just curious.
Weirdly, I went completely the other way.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I used to be heavily involved in church things, and preaching and teaching and leading groups, and involved in leadership in the church. And then through that breakdown, actually, I went right back to how I was as a young man. Uh, Now, very much, the world is a practical place. I don't believe in a higher power. I believe in serendipity. Things happen, and what comes out of that is up to you. So
Mm,
you meet somebody, and they could change your life, or you meet
mm,
somebody, you could have a great conversation with them, and you do nothing with it.
mm,
Which of those two outcomes is up to you. So for me, no, I don't have a faith in a higher power, or sort of a fatalistic view of the world. It was meant to be or anything. It's fortunate, and I'm very grateful for the second chance. And
mm,
in some ways, I've been given second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances.
yeah.
It's therefore incumbent upon me to make the best of each of them.
Mm,
And there are people out there who have every right to feel angry with me, every right uh, to be cross with me for whatever reason, because I may have made a bad decision, or because I said something to them which I meant at the time but then was unable to fulfill. We all have failure. We all have things that we intended good, but something ungood came from it. And
interesting.
the hardest thing to do is forgive yourself for those times.
Forgiving yourself is a really tough practice. That is for darn sure. I've been all over the map over the years in my own belief of higher power, on again, off again. I related it to God, all these things, but I have definitely come to understand and believe and have much evidence of a higher power. And, sometimes, this was years ago. when somebody suggested to me that when you look at what's happening in the world and nature and animals and all of the things of how this world operates, it wasn't orchestrated by man. And so when we look at higher power, when we look at consciousness, we are all part of that. I guess we are all part of consciousness. So that's how I look at it. And do I believe in a higher power? I do. Do I believe in a thing called God that I should fear? No, I don't. Do I meditate and believe that I can tap into consciousness, what we'll call a universal consciousness? Yes, I do. But it doesn't leave me, again, in the world of some religions where I'm fearing God or something will happen to me if blah blah blah. I don't live into that space, so it's a little bit different, I guess, in that regard. But I just look around this world and I go, yeah, there's got to be something that I can't explain that's a higher power, because it's for sure man didn't create this, and that's just my
Yeah,
look at
we certainly didn't, and the timescales involved. Human beings have not existed for long enough to
yeah.
have been involved in an immense beauty. Here where we are, this particular it's a little hollow in the side of a hill, and these
Yeah.
buildings have been here 300 years. We know that there's been a farm here for over 800 years, and we know that people have lived here for close to 15,000 years. This
Wow.
little space on the planet has cradled people for that long.
Wow.
But also, I use, going back to my work in the funeral industry, we have evidence of human beings doing burials 150,000 years ago. We have no clue what those people believed.
Mm.
All we know was that it was important for them to say goodbye to their loved ones in a ceremony and a burial, rather than just abandoning the body somewhere.
Mhm.
78,000 years ago, just north of Mogadishu, there is a grave that was found by archaeologists. A little boy, 2.5 years old, was wrapped. His head was on a pillow. There were toys in the grave with him. A young couple lost their baby. He died, and they buried him with dignity. A celebrant, an officiant, somebody helped them do that. And that's 78,000 years ago.
Mm.
Those are both examples of Homo sapiens, the same species as we are. But we can go back 250,000 years, and we have caves in South Africa where a hominid, a pre-human species, their brains were about the third the size ours are. They carried their dead a day's journey into a cave system. So they had to have fire because you couldn't see that far into this cave system. There's evidence of ritual. We don't know what it meant. We certainly don't know what they believed. But it seemed important to them to take their family members deep into this cave system and bury them with ceremony inside this cave system. The only thing we do know is that they weren't Jewish, and they weren't Muslim, and they weren't Hindu, and they weren't Buddhist, and they weren't Christian, because none of those religions existed way back when.
Mhm.
To me, it doesn't
Fast.
matter. I'd love to know what they believed, but the thing that is magical to me is that they felt it important to care for their dead. And so
Mhm.
for me, the important things in any ceremony, it's hello, as we welcome a child into a family in a naming ceremony. It's I love you, as we marry, or we make declarations of love, of engagement, or vow renewals, or whatever it is. And it's goodbye at the end of somebody's life, as we say goodbye to them in a funeral. But it
Mhm.
seems to me that for at least 250,000 years, love has existed as part of who we are. And that, you talk about the higher power. For me, love is something that can change the world for one individual or for the whole world. And when you see people acting, they may use the word love, but actually they're acting selfishly or they're exclusive in that, then you see evil things happening. When you see people being generous through love, that's when you see miracles happening.
It is so, yeah. And by the way, I mean, there's certainly the whole concept that all there is ultimately is love. So, we can go down that, we could go down that path for a long
Go down that
ways.
road, really. Yeah.
So when we look at your business and how you see the future as we start to kind of wind down, I appreciate your time. And when we look at your business and what you see into the future, and obviously this is, something that you want to carry on for as long as you possibly can, perhaps. What's kind of next for you as we go 2024, 2025? Do you do business plans out in that regard? Just literally for a few minutes that we had before we jumped on air, you had mentioned that you've got some upcoming programs later in 2024. Anything you want to share about those, just so that listeners can maybe kind of dig a little
Yeah,
deeper
thank
if
you.
they want to?
So the 1 in a Million Life book will be out in August, I hope. The course that goes alongside that will be out, I think, about a month after this episode is aired. So if you'd like to go to 1inamillion.life, you can just pop your email address in there and keep in touch and see what we come up with. And we won't spam you. If you're not interested in what we're offering, then feel free to unsubscribe. I don't believe in hammering people with unsolicited emails at all. So my hope, we have the hospitality business. The business plan for that is to stabilize it, get it profitable, and enjoy that business, which I really do enjoy. The celebrancy business, the creating good ceremonies for people. Again, that business is growing nicely. We're training people. I have the privilege of knowing that 1 million people a year in the UK receive a better funeral because it was delivered by somebody I trained how to do good funerals. That's
That's
a
cool.
significant, yeah, it's
Yeah.
really cool. And we're thinking about how we can expand that around the world, and which is non-trivial because cultural differences are huge. But
Yeah.
the real focus for me is growing 1inamillion.life into a really productive business. It will be something that creates value on all sorts of scales for different people. You'll be able to engage if all you want, if you just want a small business that is paying the bills for you. And I know people who escaping domestic abuse, for example, they just need enough money to put a roof over their heads and care for their children,
Yeah.
separate from that abusive environment. Great. Let's help you build that. And at the other end
Mhm.
of it, we've got people who have visions of building multi-million-dollar businesses. Great. Let's help you build that too. And for me, the joy of that journey of working with both of those groups of people and everybody in between, that's where I'm having the fun. And I will quite happily use one to cross subsidize the other if necessary, because I want a certain amount of money in my life. Flying my own airplane, restoring vintage aircraft is not a cheap pastime, but I don't need to hoard that cash. I'd rather be doing good with it. So 1 in a Million Life, and the website is 1inamillion.life. Is kind of the focus for me over the next few years of building that up and seeing how many people we can bless with all the years of experience that I've got. The mistakes that I've made, they were expensive mistakes. I learned the hard way. Now let's see if I can pay it forward so other people don't have to learn from similar mistakes.
Beautiful. Love it. So as we wind down, we'll be sure to put those links in the show notes, etc. But Stuart, as we wind down, I like to just have a little bit of fun, ask them what we would call rapid fire questions that are rarely rapid fire, but I ask them anyways. And
Go for it.
you ready? You ready?
I'm cool.
Okay. Easy one. Apple or Android?
Apple every day.
Every day. I know you're an Apple guy. I kind of picked up on that early on. Me too, by the way, but I'm not a born again Apple guy. I just
Okay.
they're good. Okay, they're good though. I there's no denying that. Okay. Um, favorite movie? Do you have one?
Yes.
Sure.
It would. Okay, so it depends on the mood, but primarily, I think the original Blade Runner is an
Huh?
absolute humdinger of a
Yeah,
movie.
cool.
I thought the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, was a worthy sequel. I did see the sequel to Denis Villeneuve's Dune, so Dune 2, the other day, and I think he's building a phenomenal arc
How was Dune 2?
there.
How was Dune 2? That seems to be all the stories. Dune 1, Dune 2. How was Dune 2?
Dune 2 was good. It was
Good.
good,
Cool.
and if you see it on the biggest screen you can see it. You know,
Yeah.
we watched it in IMAX. It was phenomenal. Um,
Cool.
but yeah, no, I love cinematography. I'll be watching the film as much for how the cinematography was done for as for the story.
Yeah, fantastic. How about a favorite tune, a favorite band, anything you go to?
So favorite band, always Pink Floyd.
Mhm.
If any of you are ever involved in my funeral, anything from Pink Floyd, you're cool.
You're
Um,
an old rocker. You're just an old rocker. That's all.
yeah, I am that old.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. And your room, your desk, or your car, room, your desk, or your car, what do you clean first or have cleaned first?
Everybody jokes that my car is always filthy.
Yeah,
I never wash the car. That's just, why would I waste my time?
yeah,
Um, Airplane, on the other hand, is always spotless because it's faster when it's spotless.
yeah.
Um, I am a messy human being, and I think that's the ADHD. I'm pretty disorganized. So every now and then I'll get to the point where it's, no, I just have to tidy it because I don't know where anything is.
Yeah, yeah.
So uh, yeah, airplane is the first thing to be cleaned.
Mhm.
Everything else can wait.
Beautiful. And if there was a God and you got to the gates, what would you want, so said God, to say to you?
um, you did okay.
Fantastic. And final question in this, Stuart, this rapid round. What are you grateful for?
Every heartbeat,
Beautiful.
every heartbeat. When I broke my neck when I was 16, um, I was lying in the ER. My mum was a radiographer. Her specialty was spinal injuries, and she pushed her way through the crowd. She looked at the X-rays. This is way back in 1984, and she came back over to where I was lying on the bed, and I said, "Okay, how bad is it?" And she said, "I've got my guys in my hospital who will never breathe on their own again, who've done less damage than you." Okay, mum, what's the prognosis? And my mother said to her 16-year-old son, if you survive tonight, it will be a miracle.
Wow.
And that night, something changed and I became paralyzed completely.
Mm.
So totally that the clinical team believed I was dead. So my heart was still beating, my lungs were still breathing, and I was fully conscious but could not move anything. Not even my pupils were moving. So they were shining a light in my eyes and nothing moved. So they believed I was brain dead. And I heard them tell my parents, your son is dead. I
Wow.
am grateful for every heartbeat.
Wow. That is such a story. Gosh, we could go off on tangents to that one. Well,
Oh
thanks for
yeah.
sharing that. What a way to end the show. And Stuart, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the Everyday Millionaire podcast. And, we often use the phrase, it's seemingly ordinary, achieving extraordinary results. And certainly you are seemingly ordinary, but behind every ordinary individual is an amazing story. And thank you for sharing yours. That's all I got for
Thank you
today.
very
Thanks for
much.
joining me, Stuart.